Welcome to this week's Paddock Pass podcast, a special show this week in the midst of the small hiatus in the MotoGP calendar. And we hope listeners and patrons have been enjoying the latest World Superbike content after the last round in Misano. Steve's show will be coming up later in the week. Big thanks, as always, to our backers who receive over 1 million mentions throughout the year for supporting the podcast. Renthal for the best street bike accessories, KTM for some of the best naked bikes and dirt bikes you can buy, and Fly Racing for some unmissable apparel, protection and riding gear both on the trail and the road. Sometimes when you write this stuff, it's easier to write it than to say it. I'm Adam Wheeler, and I'm joined by the usual two Paddock Pass podcast rogues, David Emmett and Neil Morris. And David, how is the English rain?
Well, it stopped. It stopped for a little while, so it's not so bad. But it's a good job it stopped because I spent all last night burning 60 years worth of receipts and administration, which my mum and dad never ever cleared up. But I did find all sorts of sort of romantic things. I found the receipts for their wedding ring, for example, and for their engagement ring. So that was rather charming.
So the large smoke plume over the sort of Midlands area and disrupting the flight patterns is Birmingham, East Midlands is down to you then, I guess.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, do not try to fly into Luton or Stansted because there's it looks like the entire town is on fire.
Neil, refreshed and replenished after these quiet days. Did you survive the Sonar Music Festival in Barcelona?
Just about, Ed. I'm no spring chicken anymore, but managed to make it there for a night. Also having to revert my mind into MotoGP because it's been basically football for the last couple of days. Sacrilege, I know, Dave. But yeah, it's, the holiday's coming to an end, isn't it? Assen next week. So yeah, let's go.
We were supposed to have Livio Supo on the show today. It didn't quite work out. We're hoping to get the Italian in for the next summer break after the Grand Prix in Germany at some point, because we have most of July free, as we know. And, Italy was pretty much the theme. I mean, I was in the MXGP in Majora last week, and there was some MotoGP chat going on there. And one of the topics of conversation seemed to be over the fate of the VR46 team, and in particular, who will be joining Jorge Martin in Aprilia colours next year. There's been some other sort of news stories coming up. But first of all, guys, what's our thoughts on that second Aprilia seat? I mean, would it be more sensible just to slot somebody like Miguel Oliveira in there and have some sort of continuity for the RSGP opinions?
Yes, it wouldn't. Well, yeah, maybe. But then the trouble is, Oliveira has really struggled with the latest bike and hasn't really posted the results to deserve that seat. And we know that Aprilia really, really want an Italian rider. It might make more marketing sense. I mean, they've got their rider who they think is going to win. Jorge Martin has been hired to try to win the championship because he's shown that he can do it on the Ducati. So it makes sense. You could leave Oliveira in the Trackhouse team, and he can develop from there. That's fine. He's got the same bike. You've still got his input. But yeah, I suspect that it's going to go to an Italian rider because they want an Italian team.
Neil, what's your thoughts then? I mean, because if it does go to an Italian rider, that pretty much means Digia or Bez. Who would you, if you were in control of, if you were Massimo Rivola, who would you want to pick?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I think on recent form, you would have to say Digia because he's been the second best rider on the Ducati GP23 this year. He's been super consistent, maybe not quite hitting the heights that we saw towards the end of last year. But then you could say the same of several Ducati riders so far in 2024. There's only really been 3 that have lived up to the top billing. But Digia's last couple of results have been very solid on a Sunday. I think he's been inside the top 7 at every race bar Portimao, the second race of the season. So that's good consistency. And Bezzecchi obviously has got some real pronounced struggles, but I think the heights that Bezzecchi hit last year would maybe lead you to think that his ceiling is just a little bit higher than Digia's, because he won, 3 races last year, was fighting for the championship up until the final 6-7 races of the year. Despite falling away a little bit from Indonesia onwards, was still producing some heroic performances with a broken collarbone. So I think you would maybe edge towards Bezzecchi just because he had that sort of stint last year where he was like a championship challenger for a good part of the year. Digi, we haven't quite seen that level from him. He's a very solid performer, and he's a really nice guy, very marketable. But Bezzecchi's also got this kind of Rossi protege thing going for him as well, which is I'm sure something that you could present as a kind of cool thing.
I don't know. I mean, Dave, what do you think? Because the cheeky chappy thing that Bezzecchi had going on last year was understandable because it was coming in hand with results. Even when he got injured, he was able to come back quite quickly. And, he carries a sort of nonchalance, doesn't he? Which is acceptable when he's doing the job. But when it looks like he perhaps can't get his head around a technical development on the motorcycle and he's being outperformed by his teammate, you have to wonder, well, is this a guy that could really slot seamlessly into a factory setup?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, there's lots of things that we never know. Like, we never really know what a rider's feedback is like. We sort of, you talk to people about it, and you have to try and figure out whether they are telling the truth or not. So maybe his feedback is good, but who knows? But I mean, just on the basis of results and on the basis of adaptation as well, you would say that you'd give it to Didier because he's just been absolutely rock solid. And Didier puts a lot of work into his own marketing, but I think sort of Bez has got a little bit of natural cool, which is really difficult to actually replicate. But then again, it's all very well being sort of naturally cool because, as you rightly point out, that sort of like nonchalance, which we endeared him to us all last year, is just looking like surliness at the moment.
Neil, one news story that we've seen moving away from the Italian theme is, of course, the second saddle HRC. And according to reports on motorsport.com, always a great reference that has to be said for the early kind of gossip and potential happenings, is that Joan Mir is going to sign another 2 years HRC. I mean, for me, we've had a couple of surprises already for City Season 2025. This is the biggest one of them all because Dave, the last time we spoke to Joan was at the Mugello test on Monday, and to say he was not overly complimentary about the Honda still was something of an understatement. But Neil, what are your thoughts? I mean, is this a case of maybe Mir being offered extra money to get on with it, or he's gone home, had a couple of days off, and thought, I still fancy riding a motorcycle extremely fast for one of the biggest companies in the world, and let's crack on and see if I can make a fist of it.
I mean, is it one of the biggest surprises or the biggest surprise of the kind of silly season so far? I think if you had said this a month and a half ago, you'd probably say, okay, it's one of them, because Mir, everything that he was saying indicated that he was looking for a way out of Honda as recently as Mugello, as you say, Ad. But then with the kind of recent signings that we saw last week, with Enea and Maverick going to KTM, which we'll come on to, I mean, when you sort of think about it, what were Mir's options and what were Honda's options? I mean, Honda, maybe Miguel Oliveira, maybe Jack Miller, or trying to keep Joan Mir. And I think, Mir is the most attractive proposition out of those three. And then for Mir, it's, well, what really is there? There's Trackhouse, which is a satellite team. And you look at the performance of Trackhouse this year, and it's not been brilliant. It's obviously, it is the kind of the crux of the RNF team, but it's still, for all intents and purposes, a new squad, getting to grips with the finer details of MotoGP, some new personnel at the top as well. But there's not been a great deal to say that, okay, you can go into Trackhouse, a satellite squad, and suddenly start fighting for victories. Now, I know Honda are like some way off, but maybe Mir has come to the conclusion that, the ceiling will be higher with Honda. You have to imagine Honda, understanding what options were available, probably went back to Mir and made him quite a tasty little offer. And yeah, I think it's, in a way, it's quite logical because of the options that were left. I think Mir is the best option for Honda, and maybe not immediately, but in the long term, maybe Honda is the best option for Mir. I don't know. It's not like he had a Gresini Ducati or a spot at Pramac Ducati for next year that you suddenly think like, okay, that would transform his fortunes and turn him into a guy that's fighting for the podium. I don't think those options were really available to Joan. And part of that is because his results have been so bad over the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Gresini Ducati, because we know that he did have an offer from Gresini Ducati last year, which he turned down because to stay with to stay with Honda, because it was just not very well paid. You said, his goal is to stay with Honda and make a fist of it. I think his goal is to stay with Honda and make a fistful of dollars of it. So we shall have to, yeah. So I realise that I'm treading on the dad jokes are treading on your turf, Ad. But
yeah, be careful, please. Show some respect.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that both Mir and Marini have said is that Honda, at the start of the season, they took the bike in completely the wrong direction. And that worked out really, really badly. And that was the point at which Mir was even talking about maybe retiring. But at the last couple of private tests, they've been turning the bike around, literally turning it around. They've sort of, it was very useful. The fact that they went in completely the wrong direction turned out to be extremely useful, because they found out exactly the wrong thing to do. And if you know exactly what the wrong thing to do is, then anything else is better, sort of thing. You can start ruling out a lot of things. And I think that helped Honda make a really big step. Again, it's going to take a long time for it to actually pay off. But I would sort of expect them to be a little bit better in the second half of the season, and you'd really expect them to make a big step for next year. And of course, the other thing is, I think 2027 is starting to play on riders' minds a little bit. If you're looking at 2-year deals, this is going to be the last 2-year deal before the next change. It's also interesting that it seems like a lot of pretty much all of the deals so far have been 2-year deals. People are very much looking forward to 2027, not just riders, also factories. They want the stability for 2 years that they can, so they understand what a rider is capable of and what they need, and then they can use that through the next year to help develop the bike. So they've got a better understanding of the bike. Then maybe in 2027 we'll see some changes. But I really do think that the rule change is not, it's not important right now, but it is a factor, and it's becoming the factor is becoming more and more important as we approach the start of basically design and development for the next phase.
I think the start of the year, Mir was showing signs of adapting to the kind of new role as Honda's leader with Mark's absence. And he was now basically, along with Taka, the most experienced guy and the most high-profile name riding with Honda. 1 or 2 doubts have started creeping in recently. You wonder whether the fact that his mind is made up now, he's going to be there for another couple of years, will sort of strengthen his motivation to really try and steer the ship. But there was kind of evidence over the last couple of weeks and the last couple of races that it was just slipping away, and Joanne's motivation and application were just starting to wander a little bit, and there were signs that it was like 2023 Joan Mir, when everything was an absolute disaster. The first 4 or 5 races, I think you could say that he was genuinely acting a little bit like the team leader, and the other Honda riders were kind of saying at the end of each race, like, it was quite impressive what he did today. And I was just worried a little bit that the last couple of races, that sort of feeling has tailed off slightly. But as I said, hopefully this, the potential agreement that is on the table, that might strengthen his motivation. Like, okay, I'm here for another 2 years. It's time to try and turn this ship around. I feel like the last couple of weeks, he didn't quite have that.
I would say that there's very few riders in MotoGP that look like they're suffering or struggling as much as Mir, just in terms of personal motivation. I mean, he looks like he absolutely hates riding that thing. So to believe he wants to sign up for another 2 years of it seems pretty mad. And also, if you're Alberto Puig and HRC, wouldn't it be more beneficial perhaps to say, we'll take Jack Miller because he can bring some Ducati and KTM experience, or Miguel Oliveira because he has some Aprilia insight? Surely those signatures might be more worthwhile to the betterment of the project.
Yeah, but Joan Zarco came with Ducati experience, and Luca Marini came with tons of Ducati experience, and look how well it's sort of helping him I mean, he's come with all sorts of aerodynamic advice, which he's offered up to Honda engineers. Like, look, you can improve our aerodynamic package by doing this, this, and this. And during the Sepang test, we thought, oh, wow, this is fantastic. Honda have got such a fantastic resource on their hands where they're going to be able to put him, point them in the right direction. And I mean, it hasn't quite worked out, I think, as any of us were imagining. I mean, Marini is still yet to score a point in any race that we've seen so far this year. 16th, his best finish so far, and he's regularly 20 seconds back. So, yeah, someone like Jack Miller coming in, Jack's a good rider, obviously, but when the bike is in a difficult moment, as it is, I mean, you need someone that has won a world championship before, and I think, the track records of both Miller and Mir speak for themselves. Mir's won 2 world titles, and Jack has never quite managed to get that level.
The other thing, like I say, it's also about stability. There is, I mean, in this stage of the project, it's about developing the bike. They're not going to put anyone on the bike who's suddenly going to be incredibly successful. They're going to put someone on the bike to help develop the bike. And it's much more valuable to have Mir on the bike, who already has 2 years of experience, keep the stability, just keep pushing the project forward. That's where they are. It starts to make sense. To that extent, it's sort of a little bit surprising that it's a 2-year contract, apart from, as I said, you've got to be looking towards 2027. But, the bike is not going to be competitive this year. It might start to be competitive next year, or at least a little bit. Or, well, you would hope a big step closer. I would expect them to be a little bit closer by the end of this year, and I think that's definitely what the Honda riders expect too. But the way that what they really need is just stability, so that everyone understands what the package is, what's going on, and all the rest of it.
He's not a slow rider. I mean, we're not talking about somebody who's finishing outside of the points, but would MotoGP miss Jack Miller? I mean, we only have 2 native English speakers on the grid. And if he disappears to Superbike or somewhere else, I mean, it would be a miss for the series, right?
Yeah, it would be a fantastic win again for World Superbikes. I think it'd be just a real asset. I mean, I think him and Toprak in World Superbike would just make it a fantastic. It would really make it a series worth following. But it would be a big loss just in terms of publicity for MotoGP, and it would make it sort of more of a shall we say, a non-English speaking series, which would make it more difficult to promote, especially with Liberty coming in. So but I mean, Jack has just had a torrid and terrible start to the season, really, this year. Really, he just hasn't really performed.
Yeah, I think it would be a miss, definitely. I mean, we had a chance to speak to KTM's Pit Barra last week after the news of Enea and Maverick signing on. It did sound like the initial plan was to keep Jack on board, and that they were trying to give him as much time as possible to show that he could, turn the ship around and make good in this season. But I think Pitt's sort of phrase on Jack was that when they saw that he finished both sprint and feature races out of the points in Mugello, then they thought, well, it's kind of enough, and they had to act decisively to get the 2 riders in Tech 3 next year. And when one of the current riders is not scoring points in any race, then it's kind of grounds to say sorry, mate. But we tried. Goodbye. But yeah, I think that the series would definitely miss Miller. And you would have to say his options now are fairly limited. Maybe there's a chance in Superbike to go in and replace Bautista. Trackhouse as well. We've heard that maybe Jack is trying to find a space there. But yeah, it's there's not a great deal of options there.
The little press conference with KTM Motorsport Director Pit Byra was run last Friday, and Dave, it was pretty interesting. If anything, because we know that silly season shouldn't do this, but it takes in recent results and recency bias, doesn't it? I mean, Pit Byra said as much, that when you have options on the table like Enea Bastianini and Maverick Viñales, then suddenly what you're doing on the track at that moment in time, or perhaps the previous week, really comes to the fore. And it was just a shame that Miller just didn't have, like Neil says, he had a poor weekend in Italy, and that was a little bit kind of like the deciding factor.
Yeah, but I mean, Jack's problem is that Mugello wasn't his only disappointing weekend. It was a very poor weekend on top of some mediocre weekends. You could have a very poor weekend on top of a whole bunch of really good results and still survive. It really feels like Jack has just failed to get to grips with this 2024 version of the RC16. That was the one. Yeah, I was going through all of the various permutations of there's R's and S's and C's and GPs and God knows what else that they all use there in their abbreviations. But yeah. His biggest problem is he hasn't really adapted very well to this year's bike. And if he had, then I think he would have had a much better chance of staying on the bike. And obviously, Maverick is available, and also Enea was available, and then you're starting to weigh up. Okay, well, they're doing well, especially Enea with his revival. Maverick has had a fantastic season so far for Maverick. He's having a proper Maverick Viñales season, which means he either wins races or ends up anywhere else. It was a bit of a no-brainer. So, yes, it is recency, and it is invariably true that in racing you are only as good as your last race.
Neil, one thing that Pit Byro was also telling us was that, the focus on Bastianini and Maverick Viñales for Tech 3, which is now obviously going to be orange instead of red, also realigns the brand's strategy towards MotoGP. I mean, the development structure, so to speak, is not really there anymore. But then if you look at what they've got coming through, then the real golden talent, say like David Alonso, Izan Guevara, these guys, or Colin Vaya even, they're not quite ready, obviously, to move up into the Premier class yet. So they've got a couple of years to speculate on major talent like the Spaniard and the Italian, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Normally, I think, Dave, you asked Pitt this, but normally over the last couple of years, at least one rider has slotted into Tech 3 from Moto 2 that has come in with a massive reputation, whether it's Remy Gardner or Ralph Fernandez or Augusto Fernandez or Pedro Acosta, guys that have done something pretty special in the junior categories or one of the junior categories. And at the moment, there's not really that level of talent coming through. Moto 2 is in a bit of a transition year. Some of the more fancied names are having tough times adapting to the Pirellis or whatever else it is in the class. And I think it was quite opportunistic that it fell into place like it did. From what we gather, Maverick was maybe his nose was maybe put a little out of joint by the signing of Jorge Martin. I'd heard that one likely scenario was Aprilia had probably spent quite a lot of its budget on Jorge Martin, and despite Massimo Rivola insisting that he wanted Maverick to stay and he wanted Maverick to be the new captain with Aleix Spargaro leaving, chances are they couldn't have afforded to pay Maverick the same salary that he's on now after signing Martin. So I'm sure that to an elite level rider who's won 2 sprints and 1 feature race this year would certainly not be acceptable. And I guess the interesting thing is that KTM are the one factory that's actually won a world championship with Maverick. And Pit Byro was really involved quite closely with Maverick in that year in 2013 when he won the Moto3 series. And, Pit, I don't think is anywhere near naive enough to think that, okay, I have the magic secret to unlock Maverick brilliance on a weekly basis. He said as much when we were speaking to him last week, but he does, I think, know exactly what Maverick needs. However, to kind of contrast that, I don't think Maverick could have had a nicer, warmer experience than what he's had with Aprilia over the last 3 years or so. They've gone so far out of their way to accommodate him and to make him feel welcome, to make him feel special. When results haven't been good, he had some really quite average results for a decent stretch of his Aprilia career up until really midway through 2022. It was basically a year there where they were accepting average results because they thought he could come good, and they really tried to nurture him. KTM, despite what Pitt said, they don't quite have that reputation. If you're not performing, then it's see you later, mate. basically. So it will be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, to see how the patience of the likes of Pit Power, Stefan Pirer, how that sort of transpires. Will they, after a couple of listless performances, when Maverick maybe hasn't made good in his potential, will that goodwill, will it still be there? Because it's all well and good saying beforehand that it will, but when it comes down to it and results are on the line, then it might be a different thing. But just one other thing that Pitt said, if you look at the World Championship now, I mean, KTM have pretty much signed up the guys that are 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th in the World Championship with, they've obviously got Brad and Pedro already on their books, plus Enea and Maverick. So they've gone all in.
Yeah, I think it probably is one of the strongest. I mean, we don't know what Yamaha is going to look like next year, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But it does look like one of the strongest and most sort of compact lineups for 2025 you could imagine. I mean, Maverick, the details are not specific, and Pitt didn't mention this on the call, but it's a 2-year deal for both of them, for what we understand. And Neil, I think your point about the support structure around Maverick is brilliant, because it was only recently, I think it was in Catalonia, where Maverick was asked about this, and he gave great credit to his crew chief, Manuel Cazoo in Aprilia. And there was no details, I think, from Pitt about what kind of team Maverick would have around him, whether, Cazoo is going to move across or he's going to have to work with somebody completely new. And we know that doesn't always go so well. There's been several episodes with Maverick where, even old relationships, like using Esteban Garcia, didn't really work out with Yamaha at the end. So I think it really is, I wouldn't say a risk, but it's definitely a bit of a punt, I guess you could say, to some potential success.
I think when you've got 3 other riders that you can sort of bet on to be really solid performers, and I think they have got that. Pedro, you're going to be betting next year will be fighting for the championship, and then Brad and Enea, if they can make sufficient improvements with the bike, can be fighting for race wins. I think there's no doubt about that. So with those 3 very solid performers in place, maybe you can afford to take a bit of a punt on someone like Maverick, because if it works out well, then you're made to look like the smartest guy in the room. And if it doesn't, well, he's got sufficient track record in the past for people to say, well, he's just always been like this. So I think it's a calculated risk, and it wouldn't be one that they would be willing to take, I think, if it was having to put him in the factory team. Although they're saying now that there's not really such a thing as a factory team. KTM, the official factory team plus Tech 3 are going to be very, very similar in appearance from what we can see, and in terms of the support that they get. But yeah, I think putting them in Tech 3 is a risk that they can afford to take.
Dave, it's pure speculation, of course, still, because nothing is official, but would securing Pramac for 3 years be the last great masterstroke by Lynn Jarvis in the MotoGP paddock? I mean, how likely do we think it is to becoming a reality?
I think losing both Jorge Martin and Marc Marquez, because obviously Marc turned them down at Mugello, I think that pretty much seals the deal. I mean, there's some talk that Pramac have been asked to, because they're always given a bit of a sweetheart deal. They were the Ducati junior team, so they got machines that have bikes at a cut rate, and they got really, really strong support. They'd probably get the same spec machines, the same level of support, but they might be asked to make, shall we say, more of a financial contribution towards the to cover the costs. And if Yamaha are basically saying, here's some money, we'll pay the riders, come and join us, then it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. And I can also imagine when you are, this is, I suppose, the disadvantage of having 8 bikes on the grid. You start to feel it's more difficult when you've got 3 satellite teams, or when you are one of 3 satellite teams. You might still feel sort of like a certain sort of closeness or specialness with like a special relationship with the factory, but that becomes much more difficult to maintain, especially when all of a sudden you've got Marc Marquez riding for Gresini, and a lot more interest in that garage there. So it does become, it changes the dynamics. It also changes the thoughts of where people's prospects are, what their the calculation of the whole thing. And if Yamaha come along, start offering you a lot of money, trying to attract decent riders, it's probably a much more attractive option. And hats off to Lynn. It's exactly what is necessary. It's exactly what is needed at this moment for Yamaha to get back on track and become more competitive. And they've done a lot. They've really done a lot, and they've also organised things in Japan, which is really, really important. So I think they are going in the right direction. I think it is important to Lynn to leave everything in good shape as he steps back.
Neil, sorry, mate. I just wanted to say that I think in 2025, the demographics of MotoGP might not change that radically. I mean, Yamaha still have a half a season to make a lot of progress. And as we know, they're testing when they can. I mean, Quartararo has a pretty crazy schedule. I mean, I think there were 3 days with Alex Rins in Valencia last week. Didn't have the best weather conditions, but they're trying to accelerate their work rate to catch up. But it's pretty crucial. And it's also fascinating for MotoGP, right, that we get 2 more Japanese bikes, we get 2 more Yamahas. It just mixes things up, reduces a little bit of that kind of Ducati Cup feeling, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we mentioned this on one of the previous pods, but I think it is a good thing to try and dilute, from a sort of mechanical point of view, to dilute Ducati's superiority. I don't think it's a good look for the series if there's 7 or 8 Ducatis inside the top 10, which we've seen multiple times over the last year and a half, 2 years, 2 calendar years. It is the bike to be on, and it is tough to kind of see the struggles of Yamaha and Honda on such a regular basis. And I think this would go some way to kind of helping Yamaha try and get themselves back on track. I think when Lynn announced that this would be his last season working in MotoGP, I think we read somewhere that he had 2 kind of wishes, and that was basically to secure the future of Fabio Quartararo before he stepped away, and to give them a satellite squad as well. And if he does succeed to do both of these things, then it's certainly a case of job done. So, yeah, I think it's a good point to add. It's great to see Ducati up the front, but to see 6 of them at the front, I think, yeah, it's not quite what we were wanting, and I don't think it's really what Dorna wants either. So yeah, it would be great to see 2 more Yamahas in the grid.
Neil, very quickly, if Pramac goes to Yamaha, who's riding the bikes?
It's a really tough question, Ad. I'm unsure. I have to say I'm quite unsure.
I mean, with Didier, would he want to go there, do you think?
I think Didier, if he doesn't get the Aprilia ride, could be a shout. I think Steve, I think it was you had heard when you were in Maggiore at the weekend that VR46 is maybe looking to keep its finances in check and would be happy to take someone like Aldeguer on, as well as maybe taking someone like Frankie from Pramac, which means that Didier would maybe be looking elsewhere. So yeah, perhaps that would be a good signing for Pramac Yamaha. And then maybe do they take a punt on someone in Moto2? Could be an option as well. But pure speculation. I'm sort of just trying to fit the pieces in the puzzle. I'm looking at the big wall chart that I've drawn on my wall here, and I'm trying to place which name in which spot. So yeah, that's I guess one of the last parts of the jigsaw that's still to be put in place.
Dave, is that maybe also an option for Miller then? He's been in Pramac before.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely. The other thing about VR46, just briefly, is that they inherit the factory bikes, so they get the rights to factory bikes, and that changes their budget and dynamics as well. If Pramac go to Yamaha, for Didier, Didier has said, "Look, I want to be in a factory team on a factory bike. This is his best shot at a factory bike." You would think it's got to be Miller. If there's going to be 2 more bikes, then maybe Miguel Oliveira thinks, well, I'm not going to make it into the factory Aprilia team. Maybe this is a better option. It is genuinely an interesting question. We did see that there was a story by Melo Chercoles of AS, the Spanish Sports Daily, that Toprak might be involved in that Yamaha project, but I mean that seems unlikely given Toprak is right there. I mean, he's on the verge of becoming a proper legend. You know, he's leading the World Superbike Championship after this season, or after this weekend at Misano. There's talks that he has an offer of a ride with BMW and MotoGP if BMW move to MotoGP. Of course, if he did sign for Yamaha in MotoGP, then that would be a very good sign that BMW are maybe not coming to MotoGP, and he will have a MotoGP escape clause in his contract. So it's not impossible, but it seems unlikely that he wasn't particularly convincing on his test on the Yamaha. I don't think he was. I don't know. He didn't seem particularly enamoured of the whole thing. He has talked about it. He hasn't talked about sort of MotoGP with an enormous amount of enthusiasm. So yeah, well, we shall have to wait and see. But it wouldn't surprise me in the sense that Yamaha would really have to start sort of sitting down, figuring out, because they'll have two seats. You know, they'll have two seats to fill, and they really have to sort of sit down and figure out, okay, who are we going to put on this second seat? Maybe Joe Roberts. You know, who knows? Might be that might actually be a very good, because we know that, you know, Yamaha USA in the past have pushed strongly for American riders because it's a really, really powerful marketing tool for them. So yeah, that was. Now I think about it, I'm calling it Joe Roberts to Pramac Yamaha next year.
I mean, you know, Roberts is, some people might think he's not worthy of MotoGP. I mean, he's having a good season. He's certainly got a lot of Grand Prix experience. I mean, the sort of thing that hampered like Cameron Bobier coming in, he had to sort of learn the tracks and do everything double quick. I think, you know, giving Roberts a shot would be, you know, a diverse addition to MotoGP. Why not give him a go, even if it's just for a season and a half or whatever? I mean, it's up to him to make that decision, but I think, you know, from a fan point of view, it'd be cool to see.
Just one thing, Ed, sorry, very briefly to butt in front of you. Anyone that's watching on YouTube just got to see David Emmett's very own sort of process in how he comes up and conjures names up to link them with certain factories. You could almost see him moving his hand around and pulling a name out of thin air.
No. This is all based on logic and all the rest of
Science.
it. Very deep and long, thoughtful analysis rather than just pulling names out of thin air.
Yeah, you heard it and you saw it first. I mean, I think it's that talk of all the chart, Neil, that just got him all excited. You know, Dave does it.
Had me thinking about spreadsheets.
Yeah. Patreon subscribers get to see exclusive images of my chart.
That's right. I shall. Yeah, exactly. I shall get my spreadsheet out for the lads.
Speaking of Patreon, as you mentioned, Neil, guys, head over there for some more content. One show has us discussing whether Marc Marquez is already the 2025 MotoGP World Champion. Have a listen next week, see if you agree. If you're watching us on YouTube, then don't forget to hit that like button if you don't find the show insufferable, that is. And also subscribe to get the latest update or posts. That's pretty much it for this week. A short, sharp show because Steve will be making his World Superbike roundup from Misano. How are we spending the weekend, guys? I'm about to fly to Silverstone. There's a promotional event happening with Monster Energy. So I might be trying to grab a couple of small slices as well that we can put onto Patreon. But it's just an in and out job. And hopefully with my family celebrating San Juan this weekend, which is kind of like the Spanish version of Guy Fawkes Day in terms of everybody lighting off fireworks and really putting their own personal safety at great risk. What are you doing, Dave?
Well, I should be enjoy being at home for a little while. And actually, I think I'm going to go and ride my motorbike because it does look like the weather is not going to be terrible. So yes, I think that's very much my train of thought right now.
Neil?
Well, because you've just mentioned San Juan, it's a pretty good opportunity to get out of Barcelona because I value my personal safety and don't like to have fireworks thrown in my face. So yeah, I think there's a chance of maybe a bit of cycling up around the Costa Brava this weekend, and yeah, then just we've got to sort of maximise the rest of this free time. So football, some more football, maybe squeeze in just a bit more football as well before Assen.
Come on,
England. Say, I am absolutely delighted to not be anywhere near football, and I'm not looking at all forwards to.
You're going to be in Germany, though, Dave. You're going to be in Germany where it's all happening very soon.
Will it still be happening when we're there? Oh dear, that is disappointing. Is it even going to be the bloody final on that weekend?
No, I don't think
Oh,
so.
thank the Lord for that, for small mercies. But
Don't
anyway,
worry, Dave.
still.
I'll bring my ball and do some keepy ups in front of your laptop in the media center just to keep you entertained. Okay, guys. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks also to Renthal Street, to Fly Racing and KTM. We'll be back next week where we hope to be talking to Dutch Moto3 star Colin Bayer in the build up to the Dutch Grand Prix. Dankjewel. Did I say it well, Dave?
Perfect. Amazing.
There we go.